The summer afternoon sun blazed down on the bustling streets of downtown, where tourists and locals mixed in the usual chaos near the Grand Palace gates. Officer Marcus Jenkins adjusted his utility belt and wiped sweat from his forehead as he patrolled his assigned route. At 28, Marcus had been on the force for only 3 years, but he took his job seriously. Maybe too seriously, some of his colleagues would say behind his back. The palace stood majestically behind its iron gates, its golden spires catching the sunlight and casting long shadows across the courtyard. Marcus had always been impressed by the building, though he'd never been inside. His beat covered the outer perimeter, dealing with the usual mix of pickpockets, street vendors without permits, and the occasional rowdy tourist who'd had too much to drink. As he walked his patrol route, Marcus noticed a commotion near the main entrance. A small crowd had gathered, and he could hear raised voices cutting through the general noise of traffic and conversation. His training kicked in immediately. Crowds meant potential trouble, and trouble near the palace meant extra scrutiny from his supervisors. He quickened his pace, his hand instinctively moving to his radio. As he got closer, he could see what appeared to be a young girl, maybe 16 or 17 years old, arguing with a palace security guard at the gate. She was small and slight, wearing casual clothes, jeans, sneakers, and a simple t-shirt that had seen better days. Her long dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and even from a distance Marcus could see she was agitated. The security guard, a middle-aged man in the crisp uniform of palace security, was shaking his head firmly and pointing away from the gates. The girl was gesturing wildly, her voice rising with each word, though Marcus couldn't make out what she was saying over the noise of the gathering crowd. Tourists were starting to pull out their phones, always eager to capture drama for their social media feeds. Marcus knew from experience that situations like this could spiral out of control quickly, especially with an audience recording everything. Bad publicity near the palace would not reflect well on the local police department. "Excuse me. Excuse me," Marcus called out as he approached, using his most authoritative voice. The crowd parted slightly, giving him a clearer view of the situation. The girl turned toward him, and he could see tears of frustration glistening in her eyes. She was younger than he'd initially thought, probably no more than 15, with the kind of determined expression that usually meant trouble for authority figures. "Officer, thank goodness," the security guard said, relief evident in his voice. "This young lady is trying to force her way into the palace grounds. She claims she lives here, but she has no identification, no appointment, nothing. I've explained the security protocols multiple times, but she won't listen." Marcus looked at the girl, who was now glaring at both men with undisguised anger. Her cheeks were flushed and her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. "And you are?" he asked, keeping his tone professional but firm. "My name is Elena," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I live here. This is my home. I was just out for a walk and now they won't let me back in. This is absolutely ridiculous." Marcus had heard this kind of story before. Homeless teenagers sometimes tried elaborate schemes to get into places they didn't belong, especially high-profile locations like the palace. The girl's appearance certainly didn't suggest she belonged in such an elegant place. Her clothes were clean but clearly not expensive, and she had none of the polished look he associated with people who had legitimate business at the palace. "Do you have any form of identification?" Marcus asked, pulling out his notepad. "Student ID, anything with your name and address?" Elena's face fell slightly. I left everything in my room. I was just going for a quick walk. I do this all the time. Ask anyone who works here. They know me." The security guard shook his head. "I've been working this gate for 8 years and I've never seen this girl before in my life. Look, officer, I appreciate what she's trying to do, but we can't have random people claiming they live in the palace. The security protocols exist for a reason." The crowd was growing larger and Marcus could see more phones being raised to record the interaction. He needed to resolve this situation quickly and efficiently. In his experience, the most straightforward explanation was usually the correct one. A teenage girl with no identification claiming to live in the palace was almost certainly lying. "Miss, I need you to step away from the gate," Marcus said, moving closer to Elena. If you really live here, you can contact someone inside to verify your identity. But right now you're creating a disturbance. A disturbance? Elena's voice rose to almost a shout. I'm trying to get into my own home. This is insane. Do you have any idea who I am? That last question sealed it for Marcus. In his experience, people who actually belonged somewhere didn't need to ask if others knew who they were. It was a classic line used by troublemakers trying to intimidate their way out of consequences. No, miss, I don't know who you are, and right now that's the problem, Marcus replied, his patience beginning to wear thin. The crowd was pressing closer, and he could feel the pressure of all those recording devices pointed at him. I need you to come with me so we can sort this out properly. Elena took a step back, her eyes widening. Come with you? Are you serious? I haven't done anything wrong. You're causing a public disturbance and attempting to gain unauthorized access to a secure government building, Marcus said, his hand moving toward his handcuffs. If you cooperate, we can resolve this quickly and quietly. But Elena was already shaking her head vehemently. No way. I'm not going anywhere with you. This is my home and I have every right to be here. She turned and tried to push past the security guard toward the gate, but he blocked her path. Marcus saw his opportunity to end the situation decisively. His training had taught him that sometimes a show of authority was necessary to maintain order, especially with an audience watching. Without hesitation, Marcus reached for his taser. The electric shock lasted only 5 seconds, but to Elena, it felt like an eternity. Her body convulsed uncontrollably as 50,000 volts coursed through her small frame, and she collapsed to the ground, gasping and shaking. The crowd erupted in shocked gasps and concerned murmurs, phones capturing every moment of the dramatic scene. Marcus stood over the fallen girl, his taser still in his hand, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and unease. The situation had been resolved quickly, just as he'd intended, but something about the look of genuine terror and confusion in Elena's eyes before she fell bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Jesus Christ! Someone in the crowd shouted. Did you just tase a kid? She was resisting arrest, Marcus called back, his voice carrying more confidence than he felt. Everyone needs to step back and give us some space. Elena struggled to sit up, her muscles still twitching from the electrical shock. Tears were streaming down her face, but whether from pain, fear, or rage, Marcus couldn't tell. The security guard looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other as he watched the girl try to recover. Are you okay, miss? The guard asked, his voice much gentler than it had been moments before. Something about seeing someone so young and small writhing on the ground had clearly affected him. Elena managed to push herself up onto her elbows, her breathing still labored. You tased me, she whispered, her voice full of disbelief. You actually tased me. Marcus was already reaching for his handcuffs, determined to complete the arrest before the situation could escalate further. But as he knelt down beside Elena, he noticed something that made him pause. Around her neck, partially hidden beneath her t-shirt, was a delicate gold chain. Hanging from it was a small pendant that caught the light. It appeared to be some kind of official seal or emblem. What's that around your neck? He asked, his voice losing some of its authoritative edge. Elena looked down, seeming to realize, for the first time, that the chain had become visible. Her hand moved instinctively to cover it, but Marcus had already seen enough to know it wasn't ordinary jewelry. The craftsmanship was exquisite, and the symbol on the pendant looked official, though he couldn't identify it from his position. It's nothing, Elena said, but her voice lacked conviction. Before Marcus could investigate further, a commotion at the palace gates caught everyone's attention. The massive iron doors, which had remained firmly closed throughout the entire incident, were suddenly opening. A figure emerged from within the palace grounds, moving with the kind of crisp, purposeful stride that immediately commanded attention. Captain Rodriguez of the Royal Guard stepped into view, his impressive uniform gleaming in the afternoon sun. He was a man in his 50s with graying hair and the kind of bearing that spoke of decades of military service. His medals caught the light as he walked, and even the gathering crowd seemed to sense his authority, growing quieter as he approached. Marcus, felt his stomach drop as he recognized the uniform. The Royal Guard didn't involve themselves in routine police matters. Their presence meant this situation was about to become much more complicated than a simple trespassing incident. "What exactly is happening here?" Captain Rodriguez asked, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. His eyes swept over the scene, taking in the crowd, the fallen girl, and Marcus standing over her with handcuffs in his hand. The security guard stepped forward nervously. "Sir, this young woman was attempting to gain entry to the palace without proper identification. Officer Jenkins here was assisting with the situation when she became combative." Captain Rodriguez's gaze shifted to Elena, who was now sitting up but still clearly shaken from the tasing. His expression, which had been stern and official, suddenly changed. The color drained from his face, and his eyes widened with what looked like recognition and horror. "Elena," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "My God, what have they done to you?" Marcus felt the ground seem to shift beneath his feet. The way the captain had said the girl's name, the look of shock and concern on his face, it suggested a connection that Marcus's training had never prepared him for. Elena looked up at Captain Rodriguez, and for the first time since the incident began, her expression softened. "Dad?" she said, her voice small and vulnerable. "They wouldn't let me in. I tried to explain, but nobody would listen." The word "dad" hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stared at the girl on the ground, then at Captain Rodriguez, trying to process what he was hearing. This couldn't be happening. Random teenagers who claimed to live in the palace didn't actually turn out to be the children of high-ranking officials. Captain Rodriguez was already moving toward his daughter, his official composure cracking as parental concern took over. He knelt beside Elena, his hands gentle as he helped her sit up properly. "Are you hurt? What happened to you?" "He tased me," Elena said, pointing at Marcus with a shaking hand. "I was trying to get home, and he tased me." The captain's head snapped up, his eyes locking onto Marcus with an intensity that made the young officer wish he could disappear into the pavement. "You used a taser on my daughter?" Marcus's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. His mind was racing, trying to figure out how he had gotten this so wrong. The girl had seemed like any other troubled teenager trying to scam her way into somewhere she didn't belong. There had been no indication, no sign that she was actually telling the truth about living in the palace. "Sir, She had no identification. Marcus finally managed to stammer. She was causing a disturbance, and when she tried to force her way past security? Force her way past security? Captain Rodriguez's voice rose, his military bearing making his anger all the more intimidating. "This is her home. She lives here." The security guard, who had been looking increasingly uncomfortable throughout the exchange, stepped forward hesitantly. "Sir, with respect, she had no ID, no way to verify her identity. I followed protocol exactly." Captain Rodriguez turned his attention to the guard, his expression slightly less hostile but still clearly displeased. "Protocol? Did you not think to contact someone inside? Did you not consider that there might be a reasonable explanation?" Marcus watched this exchange with growing dread, realizing that his career might be over before it had really begun. Tasing the daughter of a high-ranking official was the kind of mistake that ended careers and made headlines. He could already imagine the newspaper stories, the internal investigations, the disciplinary hearings. But there was something else bothering him. Something beyond his own professional concerns. Looking at Elena now, with her father's protective arm around her shoulders, he could see similarities he had missed before. The set of her jaw, the way she carried herself even in distress. There was indeed something regal about her that he had completely failed to recognize. The crowd, which had been recording everything, was now murmuring with excitement. This was no longer just a routine police incident. This was a story involving the Royal Guard and apparent police misconduct. Marcus could see the headlines writing themselves in real time. Captain Rodriguez helped Elena to her feet, his movements careful and protective as he assessed her condition. The crowd had grown larger, drawn by the drama and the presence of the Royal Guard. Marcus could feel dozens of eyes on him, judging him, recording him, and he had never felt smaller in his life. "Can you walk?" Captain Rodriguez asked his daughter, his voice gentle in a way that contrasted sharply with the authority he'd shown moments before. Elena nodded, though she was still unsteady on her feet. "I'm okay, Dad. Just shaken up. I can't believe this actually happened." "It shouldn't have happened," her father replied, his jaw tightening as he looked back at Marcus. "This is a complete failure of common sense and basic human decency." Marcus wanted to defend himself, to explain that he had simply been doing his job, but the words seemed to stick in his throat. How could he explain that Elena had looked and acted like every other troubled teenager he'd encountered in his 3 years on the force? How could he make anyone understand that nothing about the situation had suggested she was telling the truth? The security guard cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, perhaps we should move this discussion inside. The crowd is getting quite large." It was true. What had started as a handful of curious onlookers had grown into a significant gathering. People were pressing closer, trying to get better angles for their videos, and Marcus could hear fragments of conversation as people speculated about what they were witnessing. Is that really the captain's daughter? Did that cop really just tase a kid? This is going to be all over social media in minutes. Captain Rodriguez looked around at the crowd, his expression troubled. As a member of the Royal Guard, he understood the importance of maintaining dignity and avoiding public scenes that could reflect poorly on the institution he served. But as a father, his primary concern was his daughter's well-being. "Elena, do you need medical attention?" he asked, studying her face carefully. "No, I don't think so," she replied, though her voice was still shaky. "It just hurt really badly for a few seconds, and now I feel kind of weak and confused." Marcus knew he should speak up, should explain that those were normal effects of being tased and that they would fade quickly, but every word he might say felt loaded with potential disaster. Anything he said could be taken as either making excuses or admitting guilt. "Officer Jenkins," Captain Rodriguez said, turning his full attention to Marcus. "I think you and I need to have a very serious conversation about what happened here today." "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, his voice barely audible. He could feel sweat running down his back despite the afternoon heat being no worse than usual. "But first," the captain continued, "I want to make sure my daughter gets inside safely and has a chance to recover from this ordeal." He turned back to Elena. "Do you want to press charges?" The question hung in the air like a thunderbolt. Marcus felt his knees go weak. Charges? He hadn't even considered that possibility. In his mind, he had been doing his job, responding to what appeared to be a legitimate security threat. The idea that he could face criminal charges for what he saw as proper police work was terrifying. Elena looked at Marcus for a long moment, her eyes still showing traces of the fear and confusion she'd experienced. I don't know," she said finally. "I just want to understand why this happened. Why didn't anyone believe me?" It was a fair question, and Marcus found himself wondering the same thing. Looking back on the interaction, he tried to identify what he could have done differently. Should he have asked more questions? Should he have insisted that someone from inside the palace come to verify her identity before taking action? The fault isn't entirely with Officer Jenkins, the security guard said unexpectedly, drawing surprised looks from everyone present. "I should have handled the initial situation better. I should have found a way to verify the young lady's identity before involving the police." Marcus felt a flicker of gratitude toward the guard, though he knew it wouldn't save his career if this situation continued to escalate. The man was right. The police had been called to deal with what was presented as a trespassing situation. Marcus had responded based on the information he'd been given, but that didn't change the fact that he had used potentially dangerous force against a 15-year-old girl who was telling the truth about her identity. Captain Rodriguez seemed to consider the guard's words. "What's your name?" he asked. "Thomas Wright, sir. I've been working this gate for 8 years. 8 years, the captain repeated. "And in all that time, you've never seen Elena?" Thomas looked uncomfortable. "No, sir, but I work different shifts, and—" He trailed off, clearly realizing how weak his excuse sounded. "Elena doesn't usually use the main entrance," Captain Rodriguez explained, his voice carrying a hint of exasperation. She typically comes and goes through the family quarters entrance on the east side, but that doesn't mean she doesn't have every right to use any entrance to her own home. This information made Marcus feel even worse. There were multiple entrances to the palace complex, and Elena had simply chosen to use one she didn't normally use. It was such a simple explanation for why the security guard didn't recognize her, yet none of them had considered it. "I want to see the video footage," Elena said suddenly, her voice stronger than it had been since the incident. "I want to see exactly what happened from the beginning." Captain Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "That's a good idea. We'll review all the security cameras, and I'm sure there are plenty of phone videos from the crowd as well." Marcus's heart sank even further. Video footage would show everything. His aggressive approach, Elena's obvious distress the moment he drew and fired his taser. There would be no way to paint the incident in a favorable light, no way to argue that his actions had been reasonable under the circumstances. In the meantime, Captain Rodriguez continued, "I think we need to get Elena inside and away from this circus." He gestured to the crowd, which showed no signs of dispersing. "Officer Jenkins, you'll be hearing from my superiors and yours very soon." As they began to move toward the palace gates, Elena stopped and turned back to Marcus. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. "Did you even consider for 1 second that I might be telling the truth? Did you think about trying to verify my story before you decided to hurt me?" The question was simple, but it cut straight to the heart of everything that had gone wrong. Marcus realized with horrible clarity that no, he hadn't seriously considered that. She might be telling the truth. Her appearance, her age, her lack of identification, it had all fit his preconceptions about what kind of person would try to scam their way into the palace. He had made assumptions based on how she looked and how old she was, and those assumptions had led him to use force against an innocent child in her own home. "No," he said quietly. "I didn't, and I'm sorry." The next morning, Marcus sat in his small apartment staring at his phone as notification after notification poured in. The story had exploded across social media overnight. Videos of Elena being tased outside the palace gates were trending on every platform, each one accompanied by increasingly angry comments about police brutality and incompetence. "Cop tasers Royal Guard's daughter," screamed the headline on the local news website. Below it was a photo of Elena on the ground, with Marcus standing over her, taser in hand. The image made him look like a monster, and he wondered if that's what he had become. His phone rang, displaying his supervisor's number. Marcus had been expecting this call since the moment he'd realized who Elena really was. "Jenkins, get down here now." Sergeant Murphy's voice was curt and angry. "We have a situation that needs immediate attention." The drive to the police station felt like a funeral procession. Marcus had barely slept, replaying the events of the previous day over and over in his mind. Each time, he tried to identify the moment when he could have made a different choice, could have avoided the disaster that had unfolded. The station was buzzing with activity when he arrived. Officers who normally barely acknowledged him were now staring openly, some with expressions of disgust, others with what might have been sympathy. Marcus kept his head down as he made his way to Sergeant Murphy's office. "Sit down, Jenkins," Murphy said without looking up from the pile of paperwork on his desk. He was a man in his late 50s, a career officer who had seen every kind of police misconduct imaginable. His gray hair and lined face spoke of decades of dealing with situations, exactly like this one. "Sergeant, I can explain," Marcus began. "No, you can't," Murphy interrupted, finally looking up. His eyes were hard and disappointed. "There's no explanation for what happened yesterday that makes you look good. You tased a 15-year-old girl for the crime of trying to enter her own home." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "Sir, I had no way of knowing who she was. She had no identification, and the security guard said she was trying to force her way in." "The security guard made a mistake," Murphy replied. "You made it worse. Much worse." He pulled a tablet from his desk and turned it toward Marcus. On the screen was a compilation video of the incident, clearly edited from multiple phone recordings. Marcus watched himself approach Elena, saw the fear in her eyes as he drew his taser, witnessed her small body convulsing as the electricity coursed through her. "This has been viewed over 2 million times since last night," Murphy said. 2 million people have watched you attack a child. The mayor's office has been flooded with calls demanding your termination. The palace has filed an official complaint. And the media is calling this the worst case of police overreach in the city's history. Marcus wanted to argue, to point out that he had been responding to what appeared to be a legitimate security threat. But the video made his actions look indefensible. There was no context that could make tasing a teenage girl seem reasonable. "What, Guillermo, happens now?" he asked quietly. "Now? Now you're suspended without pay pending a full investigation. Internal Affairs will be conducting interviews with everyone involved, including you. There will likely be criminal charges filed against you, and your career in law enforcement is effectively over." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. He had worked hard to become a police officer, had genuinely believed he was making a positive difference in his community. The idea that it could all be destroyed because of one mistake was overwhelming. Meanwhile, across the city and the palace, Elena was dealing with her own aftermath from the incident. She sat in her family's private living quarters, a ice pack, pressed against her shoulder where the taser prongs had made contact. Her mother, Sarah Rodriguez, paced the room like a caged animal, her fury barely contained. "I want that officer charged with assault," Sarah said for the 10th time that morning. "I want him prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Our daughter was attacked in front of her own home." Captain Rodriguez sat beside Elena on the couch, his arm around her shoulders. Unlike his wife, his anger had cooled somewhat overnight, replaced by a more complex mixture of rage, disappointment, and something that might have been understanding. "Mom, please stop pacing," Elena said. "You're making me more anxious than I already am." Sarah stopped and knelt in front of her daughter. "How are you feeling, sweetheart? Are you sure you don't want to see a doctor?" "I'm okay, physically," Elena replied. "But I keep thinking about what happened. I keep wondering if I could have handled it differently." "You did nothing wrong," her father said firmly. "Nothing at all. You tried to enter your own home and you were attacked for it. The fault lies entirely with the officer and the security system that failed you." Elena looked thoughtful. "But Dad, what if I had been some random girl trying to sneak into the palace? Wouldn't the officer have been doing his job by stopping me?" It was a perceptive question, and Captain Rodriguez considered his answer carefully. "The issue isn't that he tried to stop you," he said finally. "The issue is how quickly he escalated to violence. A good officer would have tried to verify your identity, would have asked more questions, would have found a way to resolve the situation without hurting anyone." On his tablet, Captain Rodriguez had been monitoring the social media response to the incident. The public reaction was overwhelmingly supportive of Elena, with thousands of people expressing outrage at her treatment. But there were also some voices defending the officer, arguing that he had been put in an impossible situation. "Look at this," he said, showing Elena one of the comments. "How was the cop supposed to know she was telling the truth? She looked like any other teenager trying to cause trouble." Elena read the comment, then several others like it. "So some people think he was right to tase me? Some people always defend the police no matter what they do," her mother said bitterly. "But the majority of people can see that this was wrong." Elena was quiet for a moment, processing the various reactions to her traumatic experience. Finally, she looked up at her parents. "I want to meet with him," she said. "Meet with who?" Captain Rodriguez asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "The officer. I want to talk to Officer Jenkins." Sarah's face went white. "Absolutely not. I won't have you in the same room as the man who attacked you." "Mom, he didn't attack me on purpose," Elena said. "He made a mistake, a really bad mistake that hurt me. But I don't think he's evil. I think he's probably a person who made a terrible decision, and now his whole life is falling apart." Captain Rodriguez studied his daughter's face. Even after everything she'd been through, she was still capable of empathy for the man who had hurt her. It was a remarkable display of maturity from someone so young. "Why do you want to meet with him?" he asked. Because I want to understand, Elena replied. I want to know what he was thinking, why he made the choices he made, and I want him to understand what it felt like to be me in that moment. It was an unusual request, and Captain Rodriguez wasn't sure it was a good idea. But he also recognized that his daughter was trying to process her trauma in her own way, and perhaps facing the officer directly might help her heal. If we arrange such a meeting, he said carefully, it would have to be under very controlled circumstances. There would be lawyers present, official oversight, and you could stop at any time if you felt uncomfortable. Elena nodded. I understand, but I think it's important. For both of us. 3 weeks later, Marcus sat in a sterile conference room at the police department's administrative building. His hands shook slightly as he waited for what might be the most important conversation of his life. His lawyer, a tired-looking public defender named Janet Mills, sat beside him reviewing notes. Remember what we discussed, Mills said quietly. This is not an admission of guilt. You're here because the family requested this meeting, and the department thought it might help with the overall resolution of the case. Marcus nodded, though he wasn't sure anything could help at this point. The investigation had been thorough and damning. Video evidence clearly showed him escalating the situation unnecessarily. Witness statements painted him as aggressive and unreasonable. Even his own incident report, written in the immediate aftermath, read like a catalog of poor decisions. The door opened, and Elena walked in with her father and their attorney. Marcus was struck by how different she looked from that day outside the palace gates. She was wearing a neat blouse and skirt. Her hair was carefully styled, and she carried herself with a quiet dignity that made her seem older than her 15 years. Captain Rodriguez wore his full dress uniform, his medals catching the fluorescent lights of the conference room. His expression was neutral, but Marcus could see the controlled anger in his eyes. The family's attorney, a sharp-looking woman in an expensive suit, carried a thick folder of documents. Ms. Rodriguez, Marcus said, standing as she entered, I thank you for agreeing to this meeting. Elena studied his face for a moment before responding. Officer Jenkins, you look different than I expected. Different how? He asked, genuinely curious. Smaller, I guess, more human. She took a seat across from him, her father and attorney flanking her like protective barriers. The mediator, a department psychologist named Dr. Patricia Chen, entered last. She was an experienced professional who specialized in restorative justice processes, helping both victims and offenders work through traumatic encounters. Thank you all for being here today, Dr. Chen began. This is an unusual situation, but Elena has specifically requested this opportunity to speak directly with Officer Jenkins about what happened. The goal is not to determine guilt or innocence. That's for the courts and the disciplinary process to decide. The goal is to promote understanding and healing for everyone involved. Elena looked directly at Marcus. I want to start by asking you a question, and I need you to be completely honest with me. When you saw me that day, what did you think? Marcus felt his throat constrict. The question was simple, but the honest answer would reveal the ugly assumptions that had led to the disaster. I thought you were lying, he said quietly. I thought you were probably a runaway or a homeless teenager trying to scam your way into somewhere you didn't belong. Why? Elena pressed. What about me made you think that? Marcus looked around the room, seeing the expectant faces waiting for his answer. Your age, your clothes, the way you looked. You didn't look like someone who would live in a palace. What does someone who lives in a palace look like? Elena asked. It was a trap, and Marcus knew it. But he also knew he had, to be honest. Older, better dressed, more polished, I guess. You looked like a regular teenager. I am a regular teenager, Elena said. I go to public school. I wear normal clothes. I have normal friends. Just because my father works at the palace doesn't make me different from any other 15-year-old girl. Marcus nodded, beginning to understand the depth of his mistake. He had created an image in his mind of what a palace person should look like, and Elena hadn't fit that image. So he had dismissed her story without seriously considering that it might be true. When you drew your taser, Elena continued, what were you thinking? I thought you were going to try to run or fight, Marcus admitted. I wanted to end the situation quickly before it got worse. Did it occur to you that using a taser on a 15-year-old girl might make the situation worse instead of better? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. No, he said finally. I was focused on maintaining control. I didn't think about how it would affect you. Elena leaned forward. Do you want to know what it felt like? Marcus wasn't sure he wanted to know, but he nodded. It felt like being electrocuted, Elena said simply. My whole body seized up, and I couldn't control my muscles. I fell to the ground and couldn't get up. But the physical pain wasn't the worst part. What was the worst part? Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. The humiliation, Elena replied. Being treated like a criminal in front of my own home. Having dozens of people record me writhing on the ground. Being completely powerless while adults made decisions about my body without my consent. Each word hit Marcus like a punch. He had been so focused on the technical aspects of the incident, whether his use of force was justified, whether he had followed proper procedures, that he had never really considered the human cost of his actions. I've had nightmares, Elena continued. Not about the physical pain, but about the moment when I realized that nothing I said mattered. That you had already decided I was lying, and nothing I could do would change your mind. Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes. Elena, I am so sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I never intended to hurt you. I thought I was doing my job. But your job shouldn't include hurting innocent people, Elena said. And it definitely shouldn't include making assumptions about people based on how they look or how old they are. Captain Rodriguez spoke for the first time since entering the room. Officer Jenkins, do you understand why this incident has caused such outrage in our community? Marcus looked at the captain, seeing not just anger but disappointment in his eyes. Yes, sir. I think I do. People are angry because I used excessive force against a child, and because I made assumptions based on prejudice rather than facts. That's part of it, Captain Rodriguez agreed. But there's more to it than that. This incident has highlighted a broader problem with how police officers interact with young people, especially those who don't fit certain expectations about how they should look or behave. Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. That's an important point. Elena, how has this experience affected your view of law enforcement? Elena considered the question carefully. Before this happened, I generally trusted police officers. I thought they were there to help people. Now I'm scared of them. When I see a police car, my heart starts racing. I wonder if the officer inside is going to look at me and make the same assumptions that Officer Jenkins made. The weight of her words settled over the room. Marcus realized that his actions had not just hurt Elena directly. They had potentially damaged her relationship with law enforcement for years to come. Is there anything I can do to help repair that damage? Marcus asked. Elena looked surprised by the question. I don't know. Is there? Marcus thought for a moment. I could speak publicly about what I did wrong. I could help train other officers about the importance of not making assumptions. I could work to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Would you be willing to do those things? Captain Rodriguez asked. Yes, sir. Absolutely, if it would help Elena and help prevent other officers from making the same mistakes I made. Elena studied Marcus's face, looking for signs of sincerity. Why would you do that? It would probably make things worse for you legally. Because it's the right thing to do, Marcus replied. Because you deserve better than what I gave you that day, and because other kids deserve better too. Dr. Chen made a note on her pad. That's a significant commitment, Officer Jenkins. Are you prepared to follow through on it, even if it means admitting fault in a way that could affect your legal case? Marcus looked at his lawyer, who was shaking her head slightly. But then he looked back at Elena, seeing the intelligence and strength in her young face, and he knew what he had to do. Yes, I'm prepared to do that. Elena was quiet for several minutes, processing everything that had been said. Finally, she looked up at her father. Dad, I've made a decision about pressing charges. Captain Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. What kind of decision? I don't want to press criminal charges against Officer Jenkins, Elena said. But I do want him to face consequences for what he did, and I want those consequences to include education and community service. Marcus felt a wave of relief so intense he almost started crying. Elena, thank you. I don't deserve your mercy, but I'm grateful for it. It's not mercy, Elena corrected. It's a choice about what kind of justice I think will actually make things better. Putting you in jail won't teach other officers not to make the same mistakes you made, but having you speak about this experience might. Captain Rodriguez looked proud of his daughter. That's a very mature decision, Elena. Are you sure that's what you want? Elena nodded firmly. I'm sure, but I do have conditions. What kind of conditions? Dr. Chen asked. Officer Jenkins has to complete sensitivity training specifically focused on interactions with young people. He has to speak at least once a month at police training academies about implicit bias and de-escalation. And he has to write a public letter apologizing not just to me, but to all the young people who have been treated unfairly by police officers who made assumptions about them. Marcus nodded eagerly. I agree to all of that. Gladly. There's one more thing, Elena said. I want you. 6 months after the incident that changed both their lives, Marcus stood at the podium in the main auditorium of the Regional Police Training Academy. Before him sat 200 new recruits, their faces young and eager, their uniforms crisp and new. They reminded him of himself just 4 years earlier, full of confidence and certainty about right and wrong. My name is Marcus Jenkins, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the large room, and I'm here to tell you about the biggest mistake of my career and what it taught me about being a police officer. In the back of the auditorium, Elena sat with her father, both of them listening as Marcus kept his promise to turn his failure into a learning opportunity for others. This was his 15th speaking engagement since the disciplinary hearing that had ended his career with the city police force. The hearing had been thorough but fair. The department had found that while Marcus's initial response to the situation was within policy, his escalation to the use of a taser was excessive and unjustified. He had been terminated from the force, though the criminal charges Elena could have pressed were dropped per her request. I want you to picture a scenario, Marcus continued, clicking to the next slide in his presentation. You're called to assist with a security issue at an important government building. A teenage girl is trying to gain entry, but she has no identification and the security guard doesn't recognize her. She claims she lives there, but she looks like any other teenager you might see at a mall or a school. What do you do? Hands shot, up around the auditorium. Marcus called on a young woman in the third row. Ask more questions, she said confidently. Try to find someone inside who can verify her identity. Good answer, Marcus replied. Anyone else? A young man near the middle raised his hand. Look for other forms of identification or proof that she belongs there. Also good. What kind of proof might you look for? Maybe she knows details about the building that only someone who lives there would know. Or she has a key or knows the security codes. Marcus nodded approvingly. Excellent thinking. All of these are reasonable approaches that might have resolved the situation peacefully. He clicked to the next slide, which showed a photo of himself in uniform from his personnel file. I did none of those things, he said quietly. Instead, I made assumptions based on how the girl looked and how old she was. I decided she was lying before I had any real evidence, and when she understandably became frustrated with not being believed, I escalated to the use of force. The auditorium was completely silent now. Marcus clicked to the next slide, which showed a newspaper headline about the incident. He had Elena's permission to use the story as part of his educational presentations, though he never showed the actual video of her being tased. The girl's name is Elena Rodriguez, Marcus continued. She was 15 years old, and she was telling the truth. She did live in that building. Her father is Captain Rodriguez of the Royal Guard, and I tased her in front of her own home because I couldn't imagine that someone who looked like her could possibly belong in a palace. A hand shot up in the front row. What happened to your career? I was fired, Marcus replied simply. And rightfully so. I violated the trust that the community had placed in me, and I used excessive force against a child. Another recruit raised her hand. Are you bitter about losing your job? It was a question Marcus had been asked many times over the past 6 months, and he had given a lot of thought to his answer. No, he said. I'm sad about it because I genuinely wanted to be a good police officer. But I'm not bitter because the consequences I faced were appropriate for what I did. He clicked to the next slide, which contained a quote from Elena. A good police officer protects people instead of hurting them. Elena Rodriguez said that to me during a meeting we had after the incident, Marcus explained. She had every right to hate me, to want me punished as harshly as possible. Instead, she chose to use the situation as an opportunity for education and growth. She's a remarkable young woman, and she taught me more about justice and mercy in one conversation than I had learned in years of police work. In the back of the auditorium, Elena felt her cheeks warm at the praise. The past 6 months had been difficult for her as well. The incident had made her something of a reluctant public figure, with people wanting to interview her about police, reform, and youth rights. She had given a few interviews, always emphasizing the importance of treating young people with respect and taking their concerns seriously. But mostly, she had focused on her studies and on healing from the trauma of that day. The nightmares had gradually faded, though she still felt anxious around police officers she didn't know. Therapy had helped, as had her family's unwavering support. I want to talk about implicit bias, Marcus continued, advancing to a slide that defined the term. These are the unconscious assumptions we make about people based on their appearance, their age, their race, their socioeconomic status. We all have these biases. They're not necessarily a sign that we're bad people, but they become dangerous when we act on them without questioning them. He told the story of the incident in detail, walking the recruits through each decision point where he could have chosen differently. He explained how his preconceptions about what a palace resident should look like had blinded him to the possibility that Elena was telling the truth. The hardest part about implicit bias, Marcus explained, is that it feels like common sense, in the moment. My assumptions about Elena felt reasonable to me at the time. It seemed obvious that she was lying, but obvious and correct are not the same thing. A recruit in the middle of the auditorium raised his hand. How do we guard against making the same mistake? Great question, Marcus replied. First, always remember that your initial impression of someone might be wrong. Second, look for ways to verify information rather than dismissing it out of hand. Third, ask yourself what assumptions you're making and whether those assumptions are justified by evidence. He clicked to his final slide, which showed a recent photo of Elena at her high school graduation. She was smiling, wearing her cap and gown surrounded by her family. She looked happy and confident, though Marcus knew that the incident had left invisible scars. Elena Rodriguez graduated from high school last month with honors, Marcus said. She's planning to study criminal justice in college, with the goal of becoming a lawyer who specializes in police accountability. She turned a traumatic experience into motivation to make the system better for everyone. The auditorium erupted in applause, and Marcus found himself smiling for the first time during the presentation. Elena had indeed turned her ordeal into something positive, using it to fuel her passion for justice and reform. After the presentation, Marcus made his way to where Elena and her father were standing. Over the past 6 months, their relationship had evolved from victim and perpetrator to something more complex. Two people who had been forever changed by a shared traumatic experience and were trying to make something constructive come from it. How did I do? Marcus asked Elena, genuinely curious about her assessment. Better each time, Elena replied. I think you're really getting through to them. I saw a lot of thoughtful faces in there. Captain Rodriguez extended his hand to Marcus. I have to admit, when Elena first suggested this approach, I was skeptical. But seeing the impact you're having on these new officers, I think she was right. Marcus shook the captain's hand gratefully. Thank you for supporting this, sir. I know it can't be easy. It's not, Captain Rodriguez admitted, but Elena taught Me that sometimes the best way to prevent future harm is to turn past mistakes into learning opportunities. Elena looked at Marcus seriously. Have you decided what you're going to do long term? You can't make a living just giving speeches to police academies. Marcus had been wrestling with that question for months. His law enforcement career was over, but he had discovered a passion for education and prevention that he hadn't known he possessed. I've been accepted to graduate school, he said. I'm going to study criminal justice with a focus on police training and community relations. I want to develop better curricula for teaching officers about de-escalation and bias recognition. Elena smiled, the first completely genuine smile she had ever given him. That sounds perfect. You're going to help a lot of people. As they walked out of the academy together, Marcus reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this point. 6 months ago, he had been a confident young police officer who thought he understood justice. Now, he was a former officer whose greatest contribution to law enforcement might be teaching others about his failures. But perhaps that was its own form of justice, turning a moment of terrible judgment into countless opportunities for better judgment. Elena had shown him that redemption was possible, but only through honest acknowledgement of wrongdoing and genuine commitment to change. In a few weeks, Elena would start college, taking her first steps toward her goal of reforming the criminal justice system from within. Marcus would begin his graduate studies, working toward a future in which police officers would be better prepared to serve all members of their communities with fairness and respect. They had both been changed by their encounter outside the palace gates that day, but perhaps in working together to prevent